Okay, I think we will get started now. So, as I said before, for those who have just joined, my name is Lilian Kurz from the World Evangelical Alliance Sustainability Center. I work together with Matthias, and I'm very happy to welcome you to our webinar today. We will have some questions that we wrestle with, and I think you have read through them in the invitation sheet that you have received. And I want to quickly go through them before I hand over to Matthias, who will give a more general introduction into the topic. So basically, the background, I'm just saying, some people cannot hear. I hope that my colleagues can take care of it, because I think I'm heard. At least I hope so. Yes. Okay. So yeah, the kind of the background to this webinar was the general recognition that the outbreak of COVID-19 has a lot to do with how humanity mismanages the environment, and I think most of us who are here today are pretty aware of this. And so we want to take the opportunity to kind of take a bird's eye perspective on the whole COVID-19 crisis and ask a bit bigger questions, more related to the overall impact that it will have on society also in the aftermath of the crisis. Having said that, we want to also express our deep compassion and appreciation for all those people who are working very hard right now to kind of get this crisis under control, or kind of try to deal with it. And at our World Evangelical Alliance Sustainability Center, we have been praying a lot, and I guess that many of you have also been engaged in those kinds of activities. So the questions that we want to wrestle with are three. The first one is we want to kind of step back and ask ourselves, what can we learn about humanity, our societies, and our planet from this crisis? The second one is to step out and to ask the question, in which way does the current COVID-19 crisis provide a historic chance to rethink and redo the people and planet partnership? And the third one is to step up and to ask ourselves, how can people of faith be inspiring voices of hope and helpful hands of good these days, spreading the positive virus of transformation globally? So here, like, using the word virus as kind of a positive move towards transformation. And I am very delighted to welcome our speakers to this webinar today. We have Kuki Orokum with us. She is, I think she's not here yet, but she will join soon, I hope. She's the head of training and mobilization of the Evangelical Fellowship of the Indian Commission on Relief, EFICOR. Most of you will have heard of this organization before. Then we are especially delighted to have Catherine Hayhoe with us. She is a professor and a climate scientist, and also the WEA Climate Ambassador. Welcome, Catherine. And I want to welcome Dave Bookless, the Director for Theology from Arosha International, an evangelical NGO working on ecosystem conservation, very well known to most of us, I'm guessing. Then we have Ben Niblet with us from Tear Fund, the coordinator of the Renew Our World campaign, and Chris Elizara, the director of the WEA Creation Care Task Force, and last but not least, Matthias Böning, the director of the WEA Sustainability Center. So I greet you all, I welcome you all. I'm very delighted and very much looking forward to your inputs. And as a general remark on how we will proceed in this webinar, it will not be a formal presentation style webinar, like maybe many of you might be used to, but we will also make it a more conversational space with unscripted interventions that are possible by all of us. So at any point, please feel welcome to make a contribution yourself. For example, if you see on top of the screen, you should see a little person with the hand raised. So if you click on this, your hand will be raised, and we can see that. And then when it's your turn, we can enable your microphone, and you can make a contribution. And without further ado, I think I will hand over to Matthias, who will introduce us further into the topic of this webinar.
Yes, thanks so much, Lillian, for the nice introduction, and hello from my side. Welcome everybody to today's webinar, People and Planet 2.0. Can the COVID-19 tragedy actually be a historic reset? That's the title that has drawn a lot of attention, and we are very excited about that. We had just under 100 people who signed up for the webinar. I think some of them still struggle getting on the webinar. There's a lot of traffic at the moment in all the webinar platforms, so I hope this doesn't create too much problems. But yes, we want to deal with the topic of the opportunities that the current situation also present in the midst of all the troubles. And just to give you a brief introduction into our intention to give this webinar this title in the current situation. First of all, we can really say it is a truly unprecedented event in modern world history. The majority of the world economy has come to a complete standstill. Many countries are under varying degrees of lockdown. Mobility is significantly reduced, and literally human activity itself is significantly reduced. And all of this due to tragic reasons. A virus is affecting hundreds of thousands of people. We neither have a vaccination against it, nor do we have a cure for it at the moment. And in tens of thousands of cases, the virus illness has already had lethal consequences, and we experience on a massive scale globally the loss of beloved family members, of friends, of colleagues, of parents, aunts and uncles, people who have died from this virus. This is a reality that each and every one of us has to wrestle with at the moment, individually, in the family, in groups of friends, and in the workplace with colleagues. And in my view, the sheer magnitude of what is happening at the moment is truly hard to grasp at the moment. And each and every one of us is probably well advised to not simply go over these thoughts and feelings that come up in this situation, but really to take enough time to come to terms with what is happening at the moment through quiet reflection, authentic exchange with others, and maybe also through prayer. At least that is something for those of us who are people of faith that can give a lot of strength and orientation in this situation. At the moment, and at the same time, there is also a different reality, which is also a reality at the moment. The significant reduction of human activity on our planet Earth has, in this very short time, tremendous positive effects on the environment. And we've probably all heard already of the somewhat romantic examples of dolphins that have returned to the Canal Grande in Venice, or birds that have returned to the inner city of Wuhan, where they haven't been seen in many years. And I just want to share one picture with you showing the remarkable effect on air pollution in Manila. This picture was taken by a lady from the Evangelical community living in the capital of the Philippines. And you clearly see the difference in smog before Corona and then during the lockdown time. And it is remarkable. This also is a reality at the moment. Creation is breathing again. And I'm just mentioning this because these contrasting realities is something that we also have to wrestle with at the moment. At the same time, the enormous amount of information that is hitting us, and we all have to try to come to terms with all of that. And the intention of our webinar today is to have an exchange on that. We, as Lillian said, don't want to have formal presentations with a lot of information and data, but we rather want to engage in a real discussion around the three questions that we've put up in the invitation and that Lillian has also read out a minute ago. And I want to end my introduction with a quote by Hans-Joachim Schellenhuber, maybe well known to some of you. He's Germany's most renowned climate researcher. Up until 2018, he was director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, which he also founded. And he recently said in a newspaper interview, "No one can now rejoice in a positive climate effect because the price to be paid for it is incredibly high because of the collapse of economic output, the personal and social costs, and above all because of the human suffering caused by the pandemic. Avoiding additional tons of CO2 could not be more expensive. On the other hand, it makes sense to start thinking now about what lessons we can learn from this dramatic development for dealing with the climate crisis." And he's referring obviously to his major topic in life, the climate discussion, climate change and the climate crisis. We want to frame it a little bit wider today and talk about creation care in general. There are also lessons to learn for us in terms of biodiversity protection, in terms of wildlife protection, in terms of environmental protection. But just as a quote from the climate background. Lillian, I look into the participants list to find out if Cookie has made it, but I can't see her so far. As Lillian said, Cookie Rokum from Eficor in India wanted to join us as a presenter today, a very important voice in this discussion. I wanted to start with her, but Catherine Hayhoe is also with us, and I'm gonna direct my first question then to you, Catherine, in a minute. And before we start our conversation, please know that you can always type comments and questions into the chat. We will see that. Lillian and myself, we will monitor the chat, and you can also leave everything that you want to contribute there, and we can also plug you into this discussion. I'm really looking forward to these 1.5 hours that we have together, because I think this conversation is so important at the moment to have the chance to reflect on what is happening at the moment. And I don't know if you feel the same, but it takes some time to grasp everything, to wrestle with these bigger questions. But our goal should be, as we're trying to be salt and light, as we're trying to be good stewards of God's creation, really from this crisis to build back better, as we say in humanitarian response. So there's a huge chance for us globally to build back better when it comes to humanity itself, to our people and planet relationship. And that is what we want to deal with today. Catherine, as I just announced, I want to direct my first question to you as we start talking about the first question, stepping back. What can we learn about humanity, our societies, and our planet from this crisis? You are a climate scientist. You are the World Evangelical Alliance climate ambassador. Thank you so much for everything that you are doing. What lessons have you already taken from the current crisis?
Thank you for asking. And for those watching, if you want to just make the video full screen, you just click on the little arrows that are pointing out at each corner of the video, and then you can see us full screen. So I've been following this very closely. I was actually in Ireland when this hit and have since returned to the United States. And what I see, first of all, in regards to lessons to take away is I see some good, I see some bad, and then I see a very important bottom line. So the good that I think we're seeing is that people are willing to act. When it really comes down to it, people are willing to do what it takes. We all see the stories of the few people who are not, but around the world, billions of people are willingly taking action because they understand that it matters, and that is a very good thing. We also see that air pollution has been significantly reduced around the world, as you referred to earlier. And what many people don't realize is that air pollution takes the lives of nearly 9 million people per year. Just over half of that is directly due to fossil fuel combustion. And so it's estimated that in China alone, the number of lives that could be saved by reduced air pollution could exceed the number of lives lost in the pandemic. Not to say that this is a blessing in any way. As that wonderful quote from my colleague Hans-Joachim Schellenberger said, this is the most expensive possible way to make a difference. But at the same time, it is good news to show that our actions matter. We're also seeing the bad, though. And here's two of the bad things we're seeing. First of all, we're seeing that some of our negative behavior patterns continue. People questioning the science, people seizing on false solutions, and we see many of the same leaders who delay and act against climate action, delaying and questioning the judgment of scientific experts on the coronavirus pandemic as well. The same people, the same arguments, the same organizations. So the leopard does not change its spots. This is actually showing us something that I've recognized for a long time, that people's attitudes towards climate change and creation care and protection of this home that we share with every other living thing on the planet, their attitudes are simply a symptom of a larger issue. And we are seeing this happen with the pandemic, a larger issue of pursuing their own short-term agenda of economic gain and power over the long-term good of any other human on the planet. But that brings me to the bottom line. And the bottom line that I think we are all recognizing is this. When it all comes down to it, no matter where we live, no matter what country we're from, no matter what language we speak, no matter what political party we vote for, when it all comes down to it, we all want the same thing. And that is our health, the health of our family, of our loved ones, of people we know and care about, people in our community, the places where we live. That's what really matters. And that is what the pandemic threatens, but it is also exactly what climate change threatens as well. This is my concern, though. We didn't act quite quickly enough with the pandemic, although we still were able to make a very big difference in starting to slow the curve in many places. But with climate change, by the time we get to the level of urgency that we saw that prompted worldwide action on the pandemic, it will be too late. And so that's why we have to figure out how to bring this issue home to spur the type of action we need before it really is too late. Thank you.
So much, Catherine, for your valuable statements and insights. What really matters in this crisis, as you said, is going back to our loved ones, to our family, to the very core of society. Dave, I want to bring you into this discussion because you shared a wonderful blog article just recently. What virus do you spread? It's worth reading for all of us. We will also post it in the chat. Maybe Lillian, you can take care of that. And what's your take on that? What can we learn about humanity and our societies and our planet from this crisis? Thanks for being with us, Dave.
Thanks. It's a real privilege to be part of this. And as others have said before, what we don't want to do is, in a sense, try and be opportunistic about something that is causing so much suffering globally, both through the direct effects of the illness and perhaps even more by the economic effects, particularly on the poor and vulnerable in many, many countries. But briefly, what we can learn, I want to suggest 5 things, and these overlap with some of what Catherine has said. First, we are all in this together. COVID-19 does not respect national borders. It does not respect whether you're rich or poor. It does to some extent affect whether you're young or old, but we are all in this together as human beings. And of course, there are huge parallels there with climate change, with the biodiversity crisis. These are things that have to be tackled by the global community together. Secondly, we need to treat nature more carefully. One thing we do know is that the COVID-19 virus has almost certainly transferred to human beings from the illegal trade in wildlife and wildlife parks. The science on that is still, the detail is still being worked out, but this isn't the first time that has happened. That's happened with Ebola, with SARS, with MERS, with West Nile virus. We could go on. And the more we disrespect nature and the more we trade illegally in wildlife and wildlife products, the more we will see things like this happening. So we need to treat nature much more carefully. Thirdly, we've learned from looking at what's happened in all our countries that human societies can change their behavior incredibly quickly when they need to. Many of us have been working on trying to change human behavior to tackle the environmental crisis for many, many years. And it's been small incremental steps. But now we're seeing that when people grasp the gravity and the urgency of a crisis, behavior can be changed almost overnight. And that is a positive that we can learn from. Of course, there have been huge growing pains because of that behavioral change, but it is something that we can learn. It is possible where we see how urgent something is to change our behavior quickly. Fourthly, and perhaps provocatively, our economic system is not fit for purpose. Our market-based economic system did not see this coming. It has not been able to cope with it. And it's actually because of our globalized economic system, because of the amount of travel and trade that we have all been part of, that this virus has spread so quickly and so globally. And our economic system has not helped with the cure or with finding solutions for this quickly. In fact, we've had to rewrite the rules of our economics to deal with this. And that should make us think very carefully. I'm not an economist, but I think we need to really go back to basics in rethinking how we have an economic system that works for the health of human beings and for the health of our planetary systems. And then the final thing I think that we can learn is what's been touched on by the illustrations we've heard about Wuhan and about Venice, which is that nature needs a Sabbath to restore itself. What we have here is an enforced Sabbath or Jubilee for the Earth. And here where I am in London, we have skies that are bluer than I can ever remember previously. We saw those pictures from Manila as well. And we need to recognize that nature, we cannot keep taking from nature, we cannot keep polluting nature without having Sabbaths for nature to restore itself. That's how God designed it, and that's what we need to do. So very briefly, those are 5 points that I think we can learn from this crisis.
Thank you so much, Dave. Powerful messages in there. The Sabbath for nature. I think we'll come back to that idea. Ben, I would like to bring you into that discussion. You are directing a campaign called Renew Our World, and this has up to now been clearly focused on environmental protection and creation care, on climate change mitigation, adaptation. Is there a new sense to renew our world as we build on Dave's thoughts of, okay, there are so many systems and things we see in our world that are actually not fit for purpose, and the current crisis is showing that very clearly.
Yeah, very definitely. I agree with that. I think one of the main things that is completely unmissable now is how connected we are. So that's with our next door neighbours. We know, ironically, being apart physically has shown us how connected we are in so many other ways. So we can see none of us can deal with this crisis by ourselves in an individual house by house, household by household way. And that's true across the world. We can't deal with this one nation at a time. And even the rich countries of the world together can't pull up the drawbridge and be safe behind it. That's just not possible with this kind of crisis because of what it is. So I think that changes the way that a lot of us see the world, where we see dealing with the environment and dealing with global poverty and inequality as kind of bonus points, as optional extras. And we see now that that's a mistake, that they're integral to being human in our times. At least I hope that's what we're going to see. I also think it really points how important and how damaging inequality is. So for a lot of people, there's an economic crisis and there's a health crisis, and life has changed enormously. But if we have healthcare and food and money and enough space to keep 2 meters away, and we have clean water and soap, we can get through it. It will be difficult. We might get lonely. We might get bored. We'll certainly get anxious. But we can get through it. But if you don't have healthcare or food or money or space, and you don't have clean water and you can't afford soap, this is a terrible crisis, and the level of tragedy is much greater. And so many of us in the world don't have those things. So in this crisis, that is more obvious than it normally is to the rest of us. Spiritually, I'm thinking in countries like mine in the UK and like many in the West, life doesn't seem very fragile most of the time. Life, it's got its insecurities, but it doesn't seem fragile. It seems quite secure. You could feel you have quite a lot of control. And this reminds us that life is more fragile. And that's especially true if you live in a wealthy country, and maybe if you're a wealthier person in a poorer country too. Suddenly there's a reminder. And Christians shouldn't need that reminder, but I think it will change our societies, and I hope our openness to spiritual things, certainly our openness to thinking globally and looking up from just trying to pile up as many possessions as we could in the time that we had. And as others have said, it shows us humans are really imaginative. We can make very big changes very quickly, but most of the time we don't take the trouble to imagine that, and we don't make them, and then suddenly, when it seems urgent, we can. That's a huge contrast, isn't it? It's tackling the climate crisis that threatens so much of creation and so much damage for people. For most of us, it seemed distant a long time before it hits us, or hitting people a long way away, or hitting parts of creation that are not physically near us. But when it's urgent, when it's an urgent crisis, we can act incredibly quickly. So I was having lunch with my family just now. We're working out how long have each of us been locked down for, as different schools end at different times. Is it a week, 2 weeks? It already seems like a month. We can get used to big changes very quickly, and I hope that's an inspiring change that comes out of this tragedy.
Thank you, Ben, for these thoughts and insights. I love the idea and what you've put out. If it's urgent, suddenly everything is possible. The money is there, the political measures are there, the political will is there, something we've been talking for decades when it comes to the environmental crisis and climate change crisis, and suddenly it's all there, and you can truly change the world, which is happening right now. So let's keep that thought maybe for our second and third question later on also. What could possibly happen if we transferred that same urgency and that same level of political will and of doing what it takes to other crises and maybe the even more fundamental crisis that we're seeing in the environmental field. Thanks so much, Ben, for your insights. And as we're still struggling to get Cookie into this webinar, I hope we will. Oh no, she's there.
Yes, just now. Nice.
Great. So Cookie, I just made you presenter, and I will. Or maybe you can try for the next couple of minutes to enable your microphone and also your camera. And Chris, I want to bring you into the discussion. Chris Elizara from San Diego, California. He's co-director of the World Evangelical Alliance Sustainability Center, director of the Creation Care Task Force of the WEA. And Chris, you're dealing a lot with sustainable cities of the future. And we are seeing at the moment, I mean, I just mentioned the example of New York, the devastating effect that coronavirus has on in city environments. Could you talk a little bit to that? What can we learn about humanity, our societies, about cities from the current crisis?
Yeah, sure. It's great to be here. Circumstances are not good given the crisis that brings us together, but I just got a few comments to make that hopefully add to the content and for us to think about going forward in this webinar. The first thing I guess I want to start is from the spiritual perspective, and that is in a crisis, people start to ask a lot of questions, and definitely spiritual questions. And I know that N.T. Wright has put out a piece about this, which I think is very good. But I think the part that I like to add to that is, these are hard questions, hard spiritual questions, and there are some answers to the questions, but they're not simple answers. So lament is obviously a response, and I think we're experiencing that. But as we go forward, I think the church and evangelical community should struggle to work on answers and solutions to the crisis. So yeah, we have this big questions about faith in this time, big questions about economics, big questions about society and culture. But I believe we should wrestle and contribute to the public sphere some things that we know, things that we believe, and some solutions to the common good. And that, I think, is what this webinar is all about. And we don't need to be a knee-jerk reaction to those, but as we continue to talk amongst ourselves and talk with other experts, let's work on providing some solutions, not simple answers, but some real answers that we work at. So that's my first point. The second point I would say is kind of related to that, and that is, this issue of social distancing and physical distancing required to solve this crisis. The social distancing actually isn't something new per se. What's happened there, however, is that we've been forced to go to extreme social distancing. But I would say, and this we'll get to the city's issue as well, is that we have been going through at least in the Western world, a period of social distancing over a long period of time due to a couple of things. I'll just put those out there. Eric Jacobson has written a really good book that's going to be coming out very shortly called 3 Pieces of Glass. And those things that have been in our life that are kind of having us to wrestle with how close we are to each other and also how close we are to creation are things like the windscreen. So the 3 pieces of glass are the windshield, that's car dominated urban design, separating people, television, the TV screen, and also the phone. Those 3 pieces of glass have been forcing us into separation, I think, as a culture and as humans over the last period of time. And now we're grappling with how do we actually reconnect? How do we reconnect with each other for good? And this is what we're doing right now through this forced, drastic separation. And then how to reconnect with creation. Because after the crisis plays itself through, we're going to have to think about, how do we come back together as a culture, as a church, as an economy and economies. How do we come back together? And how do we come back together in relationship with the creation? That's going to be good and be better. So I think those are some things that we're wrestling with. But when it comes to the city, I would say it's been already said that the economic system is not fit for purpose. I would want to put on the table that the city, in its design and its function, the way it works, is tied to the economy in such a way that the city serves the economy and vice versa. So that when we think of, a 2.0, we need to see the benefits of the city right now as people are increasingly moving to cities. But then how do we develop a city and density of a city and the benefits of the density and benefits of the city that are pandemic proof? So that comes down to a design issue, comes down to an economic issue of the city, and that's tied to transportation, it's tied to producing, it's tied to consumption, and so on and so forth. So the city acts as a solution going forward when the cities start to reopen, as it were, because cities are closed now to some degree or to a large degree. How are we going to reopen them? What are we going to do to reopen them? How are they going to look different when we reopen them? I can share some ideas about that later, but those are I guess the first kind of comments I'd put into the conversation.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris, also for that important message about cities and that perspective. I mean, very powerful, also spiritual perspective. We're born in the garden, but we're traveling to a city for the believers amongst us. If you look at the great human journey in a sense. So, Cookie, I want to bring you into the discussion. It's a great honor and huge pleasure to have you with us from India. And if you enable your microphone, let us know your thoughts about this question. Stepping back, what can we learn about us?
Thank you. I think I've enabled my microphone.
Clear, thanks.
Yes. Okay, so this question about, sorry I missed, I'm a bit late into this webinar, but this whole question about stepping back, as I have reflected on this, what is happening globally in India, the tables are turning, things are so different. What I have realized as Christians and as a global community is that it is possible to bring change. Everything has changed. The way things have stopped, things have started, the way people have reacted, the way governments have taken decisions about things, about stopping travel, about lockdowns, about who we are, how we behave. All of this just brings an exciting possibility to show that change is possible. It is possible for communities, for governments to bring change. So that was the first thing that came to my mind. The second thing, stepping back and reflecting, is that what we idolized or things that we thought important, invested our monies in, are not important. Now, if you think at the world of where we put our money in, we put our money into material things, into buildings, into, let's say, cinema, Hollywood, Bollywood, or whatever it is, into fancy things, into luxuries, into entertainment, sports, or whatever it is, all that has come to an end. These are the things we have idolized, that we want to be, that we all aspire to be, big fancy buildings or things that we want to possess. All these are not important. Right now, all of us are trying to survive. All of us are trying to make these human connections. All of us are trying to ensure that we have enough food, enough things to keep us clean and healthy. And who are at the forefront of this? It's not, it's not those things that we idolize. I have a friend who worked on a cruise ship, and I was telling her, you know, this whole, the whole situation that the world is in now just goes to prove how useless and how unimportant those things like cruise ships are. I'm not condemning it as such, but it's such a useless waste of money and the world's resources. Uh, and what is it now? It's nothing, but in fact, doing the opposite of good at this moment. Then the third thing that I've been thinking about is that our current way of living is clearly not sustainable and not what was originally planned. We think we should get all our food from stores. Now stores are shutting down. We have no way of getting food because that's what we think, or that's where all our food is from. And this just, makes us think back at where are we meant to get our food from? What was God's plan and intention? You're referring to the garden and things like that. That was where God meant us to live. We were meant to live sustainable lives where milk does not come in plastic bottles, where your food doesn't come packed in some plastic container, refrigerated somewhere and shipped, for thousands and thousands of kilometers. It was meant to be in your backyard. You're meant to grow it and live sustainably. So it just goes to show now that we are, hoarding, we're stockpiling, we're grabbing food and going to the stores when they open so that we can get as much as we possibly can. It just goes to show that our current way of living is not sustainable and not what was planned by God, because this isn't what God had planned. The fourth thing, when I step back and look at this situation, is that the planet can recover. Delhi is much cleaner because the world and the humans, as we stand back and stand down and stop our regular activities that have kept us so busy for so long, when that has stopped, the planet is recovering. The planet is breathing. And in many ways, I think healing. And so it gives us the possibility and the hope as well that it is possible for the world to recover and to heal as well. So those are the things that I've been reflecting on. Just before this webinar, we had our meeting in the organization that I work with, Evangelical Fellowship of India Commission on Relief. And we were talking about what are we looking for in the future? What is the possible future? It's not known, but possibly it may not be cities. It may be that we don't think of smart cities, but our towns and villages, rural India will be where we're looking at for future development, and the kind of development that is not what is currently practiced, but development that is sustainable, that respects the earth and God as well. So perhaps we will have quite a different way of living, and I'm sure we will after this whole period is over.
So much, Cookie. Very, very important voice and insights and ideas here coming from you, from India. Thank you so much. And I actually want to move to the second question. I haven't seen any particular bigger question or comment in the chat. There was one discussion I would simply like to mention, which is somebody said some or is it some preachers are talking of, is this the end, and how do we sort of wrestle with that notion, and preachers who are putting out messages like that. I want to move that discussion to the third question: how do we, as people of faith, can be inspiring voices in this current time? And maybe some of the speakers can then refer to challenges like that coming from the inside, from preachers who are talking in that direction. But also, again, the invitation, if there's anything you want to contribute from the participants' side, please let us know. That's the format of this webinar. We want to engage in a lively discussion and also bring in further voices. It's not only the speakers that have been invited to speak who can contribute valuable insights. With that note, I want to move on to the next question. As we were stepping back, looking at the big picture, we do have a real historic chance to step out and ask ourselves, in which way does the current COVID-19 crisis provide a historic chance to rethink and redo the people and planet partnership? And Dave, I would like you to do the start in this.
There was someone raising his hand.
Question,
Melissa
yeah.
was wanted hand.
Okay, Melissa, we'll bring you in to the discussion in a second. Maybe you can prepare that, Lillian. And I just wanted to mention also to our presenters, some of you have sent us slides beforehand. Please let me know if there's anything you want to show from your slides, and I can bring in that visual then to everybody on the webinar. But now, Melissa, we want to bring in your comment or your question. Could you unmute your microphone?
Sorry, Matthias, she stepped away from the meeting now for whatever reason, so she's not on it anymore.
Okay.
But
okay.
I will monitor it, and if she's back and wants to say something, then I will let you know.
Let's do it like that. Thank you, Lillian. And Dave, over to you.
Hi. So in terms of how the COVID-19 crisis gives us a chance to rethink and redo the People and Planet Partnership, I want to suggest four things. Firstly, I think we need to see COVID-19 as a warning of what is to come in terms of global disruption. And this isn't easy for us to hear because it's been such a painful thing. But we are going to see further viruses almost certainly emerge, which will become global. We need to be prepared for that. But also what we have seen happen over a course of days and weeks with COVID-19 is a kind of speeded up version of the kind of disruption that climate change and biodiversity loss and the other environmental problems that we are causing are going to cause over a much longer period, but sometimes with sudden abrupt shifts. And I'm sure Catherine will be able to tell us more on the science on that. But we need to see COVID-19 as a warning of what is to come and make sure that our human communities, our food systems, our travel and everything else, our health systems, our economies are much more resilient to be able to cope with all of this. So that's the first thing. Second, third and fourth are three areas in which I think we need to rethink the relationship between people and planet. And the first is education. Here in the UK, most of our university and school courses have been cancelled for the rest of this academic year because of COVID-19. And it's been a chance for us to step back and ask, what are we educating people for? How are we educating people? Are we simply trying to produce economically productive units? Or are we actually educating global citizens with values such as justice, values such as a belief in one humanity, that we are all together on this, internationalism, interdependence, both on our human neighbors and on the natural systems that we're dependent on. So a chance to really think our philosophy of education and our practice of how we educate children and young people especially. Secondly, economics. Again, I know Tier Fund and others will probably have more to say on this, but we need to move towards a restorative economic system that is based on how nature works. For instance, within nature, there is no waste. Everything gets reused and recycled. So any economic system that creates non-reusable, non-recyclable waste is a damaging system. We need to have economies that account for the environmental benefits and costs and risks in a way that our current economic system simply does not. And then finally, in terms of environment and ecology, we need to have better ways of measuring what it means for us to flourish. GDP, gross domestic product, is a really feeble way of measuring how well a country is doing. And there are now all sorts of creative ways of looking at blue skies, for instance, looking at birdsong, looking at the health of our old people and our young people, looking at life expectancy, looking at forest cover, looking at pollution levels. These need to be put into our metrics of human flourishing and of natural flourishing if we are really going to be able to live positively with each other and with the environment that God has placed us in. So those are my suggestions as to how we can rethink and redo the partnership between people and planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dave. And I want to pass the word to Catherine. Hey ho again. And Catherine, you were saying before the same leaders who are enabling and enforcing the lockdown at the moment, the very same leaders are blocking any progress on climate protection and environmental conservation. So what's in there for us? In which way does the current crisis actually provide a historic chance to break this deadlock and to rethink and redo the People and Planet Partnership?
Well, sadly, what we see are some of the same people and organizations and leaders who question climate science, also questioning the science on the pandemic, offering suggestions and solutions that don't actually work, questioning the severity of the issue, and emphasizing, as Dave just pointed out, the importance of economic recovery over people's lives. These are the messages that we see, and people might say, well, that's just because you live in the US. No, we see these same messages. I just heard them from the Netherlands yesterday. We hear them in the UK. We hear them all around the world from the right-hand side of the political spectrum. And I think that's what gives us an opportunity, because so many Christians are historically affiliated with one side of a political spectrum, when the reality is that we're not called to identify ourselves by political ideology. We're called to identify ourselves by who God has made us. So looking to the future, this is an opportunity to rethink the future, because if you look at the industries that are most negatively affected by the economic shutdown, those industries and those sectors are, first of all, industrial production that's powered by fossil fuels, transportation, both vehicles and aircraft that are powered by fossil fuels, cruise ships, which are not only powered by fossil fuels, but can be extremely polluting to the water as well. We're looking at the slowdown in economic productivity of some of the main sectors that produce most of the pollution that we have. In fact, around the world, 1 out of every 6 people dies from some type of air, water, or soil pollution every year. So we have a tremendous opportunity to rethink the way that we do things. Countries are putting stimulus packages together. Will that money go to moving the economy into the future, into a future that is powered by clean energy, or will that go towards shoring up the dirty and polluting ways of the past, keeping us tied even longer to the old ways of doing things that we've been trying to move past? That really is the question right now. And although we certainly see people calling for this move and more voices are needed, unfortunately, when people are afraid, they tend to return to what they know best. And when what people know best is the way that we've done it in the past, not the future. So fear really is one of the greatest, I would say, potentially the greatest threat that we confront today. And what we believe has the answer to that. Because as Paul said to Timothy, we know that fear is not from God. What we have is we have a spirit of power, which means we are empowered to act with a spirit of love, caring for others, and a sound mind to make good decisions based on the information that we have.
If people are afraid, they return to know to that what they know best, and what we know best is what has been there before. So there's a case for courage in this current crisis. Ben, how can we bring courage not only into the usual network of environmentalists and people who are calling for renewal of our world, of a big transformation, but how can we communicate a message of courage and live up to this historic chance to rethink and redo the people and planet partnership?
I think the crucial thing is seeing how big this opportunity is. So I think the COVID-19 crisis looks likely to be the biggest economic event of this decade, but probably this generation, and maybe even my lifetime. It's the biggest chance we could possibly imagine so far, though Dave's warned us that maybe bigger chances are coming. But so far it looks like the biggest chance to restructure our economy as nations and as a world that we've ever had, probably, or certainly that we've had since the Second World War. Maybe even bigger than that, though. So looking at the size of the opportunity, I think, is absolutely crucial, because it's the biggest opportunity we have for the economy, and that makes it also the biggest opportunity we have for the climate and for the rest of the environmental crisis we face. So the decisions made in response to COVID-19 in the immediate phase of the crisis, how do we keep the economy afloat, those kind of decisions, and then the ones as we start to come out of it, which may be quite soon, or maybe over a couple of years, or could perhaps be longer. But whenever it comes, that will shape the rest of the world for a long time to come. And this is the crucial decade for emissions, so that, whether it intends to or not, will shape what happens to our climate absolutely crucially. So I think the most common command in the Bible is don't be afraid. And right now I'm not doing very well on that one. I'm afraid we will miss this opportunity. I'm hopeful we'll take it, but I'm also afraid of all the things we're all afraid of right now, that my loved ones, people close to me will catch the virus, of the effects of it amongst the world's poorest people in particular, if it gets into refugee camps or urban slums where there's no soap and no water, and lockdowns mean there's also no cash. I'm very afraid about the consequences of that. But I am, at the moment, more hopeful about taking this great big opportunity. So after the Second World War, on that awful platform, there was a moment of vision and rebuilding called the Marshall Plan in Western Europe, and the US provided a lot of funding and trade, debt cancellation and help in other ways to help Western Europe get back on its feet and do more than that, and make a good start again, not just start to survive again, but start to flourish again after the Second World War. A level of government spending across international borders that nobody would ever have contemplated before that. And after COVID, we need a Marshall Plan style of thinking, not a business as usual style of thinking. So that's the hope. In the G20 statement, they had a summit a week or so ago, and they said, we will do whatever it takes to respond to the pandemic and to rebuild the global economy. But they did not say anything about doing whatever it takes to make sure that they rebuild that economy sustainably. That's the battle that's coming. That's the task for us, and it's the hope, but it will be a fight as well. It will be a battle of ideas, a battle of energy, a battle of, as Catherine said, a battle of fear and returning to normal against courage and vision.
Pass the word to you. Oh, Ben, did you want to continue? No.
I wrote out some points for how the recovery should work, which is on another slide, which I don't want to go through now.
The manifesto?
That one. Yeah, great.
Great. Yeah. Please go on.
I don't want to talk about these. I just want to share them with you, and you can look at them afterwards. But I think these are the principles for how the recovery should be done, so that no one's left behind. It's international. It includes the rich and the poor. And the poor need to be at the front of the queue, and the rich need to be at the back. But we all need to be there. We're all in this together. As Dave said earlier, I think it needs to be sustainable, because the threat of the climate and nature crisis to kill people is still much greater even than the threat of this virus. And I think a key principle is bailing out people, not bailing out polluters. So if we bail out industries that pollute and cause great damage just because they employ some people in the meantime, that seems to me like worshipping mammon. So we are sacrificing things to a god that we hope will give us something back. But the sacrifices are much greater than the gain, and it's wrong in the first place. So it's much better if we bail out people, and if governments provide money and jobs and retraining for people who used to work in polluting industries, so that those can stop, and planes that are grounded now can stay grounded mostly, and we can rebuild in other, and coal power stations that have not been used don't fire up the furnaces again.
You're on mute, Matthias. You are muted.
Okay. I just wanted to say we also provide all the slides on the resources page, where you can also later on find the recording of this webinar, just for you to know, so you can revisit and review all the slides that were presented and the points of our speakers. And Cookie, I want to pass the word on to you now. We had a wonderful comment by Peter Nitschke in the chat, who said courageous learning, and he referred back to what Catherine said before. Courageous learning includes unlearning the usual, the way we did things before. So you were already talking to that, Cookie, before, what needs to change in our lifestyle. How do we unlearn the usual?
Well, I think, God has given us a tremendous opportunity at this time. I don't want to say that this is not a serious crisis. I mean, we're all fearful, like Ben and the others have said before. We're all fearful for what this virus is doing and can do. But this is also a tremendous opportunity to change and also to realize that we can change the way we live, because we are being forced now to change the way we live. What was normal to us is no longer doable. And so we are going to come to a place of a new normal, whether we like it or not. It's not our choice. It's just happening to us. We are stuck in our homes at the moment because of the lockdown. We're not able to do the things that we thought were important to us before. We are not investing our time and monies in the same things that we used to. So we are going to have to change, whether we like it or not. And I think if we want to continue to survive, we must change the way we live. We have to change the way we live. We have no choice. And I think this is one way of all of us learning that we have no choice. Earlier, when we talked about climate change and things like that, a lot of us had some degree of choice. Like, if I have enough money, and it gets too hot in India or wherever we are, I can just buy an air conditioner, contributing again to dirtying the world. But I could protect myself in a certain way against all these things that were happening. If it rains too much, I just stayed indoors. If the water is unclean, I just buy a machine that cleans my water. If, or I can buy an air purifier that runs on electricity so that I can breathe clean air in Delhi. All these are ways in which we kind of protected ourselves from the impact of climate change and environmental degradation and pollution. But now with this virus, we are coming face to face with something that we cannot hide from. And even in that, of course, we know that the poor are even more disadvantaged, and I won't go into that right now. But I think we're, face to face with a reality that forces us to change, and then we must change. And I think this is also an opportunity for us to rethink what it means to love God. This is God's world. What does it mean to love God in God's world? And how can we honor him through the way we live now? Because the way we lived before was unacceptable, did so much harm, brought so much injustice. What does it mean to love God? And what does it mean to love our neighbors as ourselves? It's incredible right now in India, where in this present crisis, of course, there's a lot of rubbish and a lot of evil that is going on as well. But there are so many people who are stepping out, helping each other. There are people who have, for example, forgiven, said you don't have to pay rent for a whole month to people that are lodging in their apartments or their buildings. The government of India has even come out, the Ministry of Home Affairs has even come out saying that you should not charge rent to people for a month. And if you do, then you will be, liable to be punished or whatever, you can be reported. So what I'm trying to say is that it is possible to change. It is possible to be generous. It is possible to live a life that does not, crush the earth and crush the poorer people. So it means that we can together bring change. And I'm quite hopeful of that in spite of, the rubbish that is coming out of certain political leaders. I think it is possible for change. I think it is possible to be generous. I think it is possible to have a new world order. And as Ben said, this is the time. This is the time when nobody is shielded from this. And I think that's in a way a blessing because nobody is shielded. And the amazing thing so far, maybe it's the lack of tests or whatever, is that so far the poor have been shielded. And my prayer is that the poor will continue to be shielded from this. It's the powers that be, the really famous and the important people that have been affected, and which is not good at all, but which gives an opportunity for us to really understand that things can happen and will happen that affects anybody and everybody. It's not always just the poor who have to suffer the most, although they are doing now in many different ways at the moment. And also, I think this is an incredible opportunity for us to practice the Jubilee principles. I feel that if we go on the right track, we are heading to a more equal world where the rich and the poor, the rich have no choice but to share what they have with the poor. People are taking pay cuts. Big company executives are taking pay cuts. They're having to take pay cuts. And I think if you see it from that, from a positive perspective, perhaps we are heading towards an economy which is more equal. And also, this is an opportunity that the planet is getting a chance to rest and to heal. Not because we have made a conscious choice, but because there is no other choice. And I think we really need, when I've been thinking about this, I've been thinking maybe this is an enforced jubilee that God has placed on us. We can't access the cash or the food. All of us are disadvantaged, even those who are formerly protected. Will it lead to a more equal or egalitarian society? And although I want to go and work, although I want to fly right now to another destination and have a meeting somewhere, or although, I want to do lots of things that harms the environment, I cannot do it right now. And I wonder if this is the time of like an enforced jubilee.
What a wonderful idea and way of putting it, an enforced.
So I think although there is fear for our own lives, fear for the safety of of our loved ones. I think
Thank
this is an
you. Thank you,
opportunity.
Cookie. Sorry for talking over you. I think either my or your connection was lost for a second. Thank you so much for this great idea and thought of the enforced jubilee. That gives us a lot of food for thought and for discussion. And as Dave is just mentioning in the chat, jubilee is actually a theme for this year's season of creation, from the beginning of September all the way through the beginning of October. Isn't that interesting? I just put it like that. I just wanted to transition now to the third question and pass the word to you, Chris. Maybe you can take us from the second to the third question. So rethinking and redoing the People and Planet Partnership, and then also speaking to the way we as people of faith can be inspiring voices of hope and helpful hands of good these days. And to give you a little bit something from the chat, I wanted to read out something that Donna Tulmin wrote into the chat. Great comment. For those of us in leadership in large and small NGOs and organizations, what practical steps can we take towards rethinking how we do things? What should we do to become carbon neutral and sustainable? So, Chris, in the Creation Task Force, one of the main themes you're talking about is taking leadership for creation care and redoing and rethinking the way we run our organizations, run our churches, run different types of social entities. So maybe you can take us from the second question to the third question and talk to the question, how can people of faith be inspiring voices and at the same time helpful hands of good these days, spreading the positive virus of transformation globally?
Thanks, Matthias. I'm going to leave my webcam off so that hopefully I'm not going to break up on the video and not be able to hear me. But I'll just mention a few things. And I'll kind of limit my comments to the city, and because it's not something we normally think about. And I want to refer to Cookie's caveat about cities, and that, you know, when I think of cities and I talk about cities, it's not to the exclusion of the rural. When we think of the rural, we think of a relationship to a city, and we think about a city, we think about a relationship to the rural. So we need to get strong and more healthy relationships between the rural and the city. A city doesn't feed itself; it needs the rural farming community and a solid, integral ecological farming system that connects to the city, where most of the people in the world are actually living, and they're actually going to, and the trends are moving to the city. So we're in a time period of rapid global urbanization, and I don't think that this COVID-19 crisis is going to stop that. So what I'm talking about is, you know, currently about 50% of the world lives in cities, but in the next 20 to 25 years, we're going to have 75% of the world's population living in cities. So the solution that we need to develop economically, ecologically, need to take into serious consideration, you know, the city and the way that the city works and the economic justice of the city. So I'm just going to put out a few things. First of all, in the chat, I mentioned that we have this work that provides a theological and a little bit broader foundation for understanding cities from a Christian perspective. I'll point you to that to explore that and then walk that forward. The second thing I'd say is that it's already been mentioned that, you know, cities and the transportation system go hand in hand. And so there's transportation between cities where goods and services and people go back and forth between London and Birmingham, or between LA and San Diego. But then there's an internal transportation system as well. So we need transportation systems that are cleaner And a simple way to do the internal within cities transportation system that's designed, that's cleaner and more effective, I think, for folks at a local level, at a neighborhood level, is to make streets walkable and multiple means of transportation. So the car, which is places have been designed around the car, particularly in the West, we need to redesign streets for people for walking, streets for biking, streets for cars, but not at the exclusion of the other modes of transportation. If we can look at some solutions for streets and transportation within a city, that's going to help us when we go forward in a new way, and the economy changes around that transportation system. So let's have some advocacy within our understanding, first of all, and then advocacy for what we understand to transform cities and transportation options within the city. And obviously, there is a movement afoot for redesigning walkable places and walkable cities. And Paris, for example, just put out a plan, which I think is a pretty good one, about a 15-minute ped shed walkable neighborhood. And essentially, you can get what you need to live within that 15-minute walkable designed neighborhood. And some of that's going to be require retrofitting places, new places that are designed, need to design to the design principles, so that, you know, when we're making a place pandemic proof, you need to be able to walk to the grocery store or walk to the corner store to get food, and other things that you need as well. So there is this urban design solutions that we need to start working on, and having mixed-use walkable solutions, retrofitting, new design is important. And there's many other things, and I would point you towards engaging with UN Habitat to get its ideas about making cities resilient to climate and to climate change, but also working on making cities pandemic proof. And the last thing I guess I'll mention is that cities, people congregate in cities because cities offer benefits that are you only get when you have density. And those benefits people recognize, people want, and that's why people are going to cities. And so I just want to point out there's a difference between density and crowding. And so density is basically people per unit of land, X number of people per land, but crowding is a problem when you put people into a space. So crowding is related to space and people within a space, too many people within a space. So, and density is people aggregating in a unit of land. So 20,000 people per acre or so on. So what we need to do in terms of we start to think through how we design space and density that works in a healthy way is a challenge, but I think it's a design challenge that we can handle with some good leadership, some good contributions from the Christian community, and so on and so forth. So I'm optimistic that, you know, with this fourth Sabbath, we can think through how we want to redesign, reconfigure, rebuild our lives in places and cities that are going to be new and will serve us and the creation in a better way. And I can talk more about this later, but it's a starting point for some solutions.
Great. Chris, thanks so much for this very practical application of the thought of forced Jubilee and a Sabbath that we're currently experiencing onto the way we design the places where we live, which most probably will be cities in the future for the majority of people worldwide. Unfortunately, we have to come to a close end of this webinar. Our time is nearly up, and we want to come to the final question, stepping up. How can people of faith be inspiring voices of hope and helpful hands of good these days, spreading the positive virus of transformation globally? And this question has been inspired by Dave's blog article that I can highly recommend to you again. It's you can find it in the chat, the link, so please make sure to read it. How can we, people of faith, be inspiring voices of hope? And I just want to ask our speakers today to be short in their answers for this final round, so we can maybe plug in one or two voices from the participants at the very end. And Catherine, may I pass the word to you for your answer to this third question?
Yes. So for this question, I think that we've already started to touch on the main themes. And what we see around the world really is fear. And we know that we are told to not be afraid. And so in a sense, we have the answer to what the world most needs now. And the answer is not to be afraid, but to love others, to be empowered to act, to take the information that we have to make sound decisions for the benefit not just of ourselves and our families, but for those around us. So I think that today it offers a true opportunity for us to show people that love, not just speak about it, to demonstrate it in what we can do for others, whether it's reaching out to them, whether it's doing something practical to them, for them, and most of all, I love spreading the positive virus of transformation. Is such a great way to think about it, because we have seen that although we are separating from each other physically, we are starting to reconnect with each other socially in a way that we have not seen for decades, even a lifetime. So this truly is an opportunity, I think, to show that we are one body, that we are motivated by love, not fear, and that there is a better future that we can reach together. Thank you.
Catherine, over to you, Dave.
Hi, yes. So I speak very briefly about virtues and vision. My blog is about how we can spread the positive viruses of faith and hope and love as core Christian virtues. And I really feel that those are something distinctive. Not that there aren't many of our neighbors of other faiths and of no faith who are showing great love and self-sacrifice at this time, but these are virtues that flow from the heart of our faith. And particularly in this time of fear, the fact that we have a sure and certain hope that is rooted in who God is and in God's promises. So those virtues, I think, are critical, but then we should have, as Christians, a vision of the good life. And I would encourage people to read Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 5 to 7. It's written to an urban context. It's written to people who are refugees, asylum seekers, if you like, the people of Israel in exile in Babylon. And it's a vision of an incredibly holistic and integral way of caring for the earth, caring for our neighbors, working for the welfare, the shalom of the city in which God has planted us, that brings together a lot of the thoughts that we've been talking about today. So I think as Christians, we can offer virtues that flow from our faith, and we can offer a vision of the good life for all people and for the whole of God's creation. That's all I want to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And Cookie, briefly over to you, to India.
Okay, I'll be very quick and say that in this time, I think we need to be salt and light. I think we need to reflect on what are the properties of salt and what are the properties of light. Salt brings healing. It brings flavor back into things. And so let's be agents of healing. What does light do? It shows what is in the darkness. And therefore, as Christians, we can be the ones spreading the correct information. Light also brings hope and is a symbol of life. And I think it's so important to be that symbol of hope and light in this situation. We as Christians can also be at the forefront of practicing Sabbath and Jubilee. We need to be at the forefront of bringing a more equal world and saying, yes, I am willing to give up a lot of what I have so that we can have a more equal world. I think we need to continue the ministry of care for the poor, the sick, the ones displaced at this time because of the virus and already displaced. We need all of us to have a living faith. A living faith is faith that is accompanied by action. So we should stop talking and do something. And I'm hopeful because the virus has broken down walls and church boundaries that were created by humans of, traditions or denominations. We've begun to realize that the church is the body, and it is in this body that we are connecting to one another and not bound between those four concrete walls that we are bound by. And so I think it's hopeful that we can break these boundaries, and I pray that this will continue to be so, that we wouldn't be those ghettos of worship, but we can reach out as the body of Christ. We need to be messengers of life as well. Death is inevitable, whether through this virus or whatever, but we need to be messengers of life, that we have a future hope in Christ. And I think as Christians, we need to realize as well that the earth is the Lord's. It will heal, and perhaps it is in creation that we will find our healing. And my hope also is, can we look forward to a reordered world when things will be different? And that is my prayer and my hope.
Much, Cookie. Chris, a brief final thought from your side. Okay, Chris doesn't seem to hear me. Ben, we'll pass the word to you.
I think we need prayer, love, and political space. And those are our contributions. So prayer throughout all the stages of this crisis, love for our neighbours in the immediate crisis, friendship for people who are lonely, mourning with people who are mourning, and providing for people who are suddenly destitute, and particularly getting cash to people, or getting money through phones or whatever means we can to people who have nothing. And longer term rebuilding. Christians can tell stories of hope. We can create the political space for governments to think big, to think about sustainability, to think about building back better, not just business as usual. And that should come naturally to us. We're people of hope, of generosity. We're people who can think bigger than just ourselves. And that's going back to the prayer. We can believe things can be better, and we can call for that to God, and then that can inspire the campaigning of all of our churches and of Renew Our World.
Much, Ben. Chris, I think you're with us now. A brief final thought from your side.
I have nothing to add to the insights that have been shared, so I'll pass.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you to all our speakers today. This has been a wonderful conversation, a very timely conversation. And I just want to mention one comment that was just put into the chat by Reverend Rachel Mesh. So great to have you with us, Rachel, from South Africa. She wrote, one issue is that the environmental movement should not be seen to move too quickly to the post-corona reset. This is good for the planet stage. Yay, there are the dolphins in Venice, and Catherine wrote very rightly, so we have to be careful with informations like that. Are the dolphins really returning to Venice? I've said it myself, but in these times we really have to be careful of fake news and of things that get bigger than they actually are. We run the risk of coming across as uncaring for those who are in the thick of it, losing loved ones, losing jobs. There are quite few positives for middle-class people. For example, less traffic, more time with family, work from home. It is a disaster for the poorest of the poor who work for a daily wage and the embattled health services. And I think this is a very, very important comment, and I want to come back to the initial question we asked as a title of this webinar, Can the COVID-19 Tragedy Be a Historic Reset? And I think overall we can answer it with yes, it is the opportunity for a historic reset. If we act rightly now, if we take the time for reflection and rethinking, but at the same time, we should also make sure, especially as people of faith, to be compassionate in the very crisis that we have now. And also maybe as a final personal word from my side, not to fall into the trap of hectic hyperactivism now again, because actually it's a real chance for us personally as well to sort of calm down a little bit as the whole human activity calms down all around us, and not move all of our hectic hyperactivism to digital channels now, but to also seize this chance, also in spiritual terms, to be silent and know He is God, and try to discern what the deeper messages of all of this are for myself, for my family, for my life, and for my spheres of influence around me. And there would be so much more to say. There were wonderful comments in the chat. I hope you've taken note of it. You will find the recording on our website, World Evangelical Alliance Sustainability Center, along with the slides of our speakers. Not all of them we have shown today. And again, I want to say thank you to our speakers today. I want to say thank you to our wonderful participants and for your interaction. And I pass the word over to Lillian for some final remarks.
Yes, thank you very much, Matthias, and thank you also everyone from my side for this very insightful webinar. I have been following everything very attentively, and I think what I will do is to collect all the resources that were shared in the chat and send them around to all the participants once more, in order to also increase connections and networking among ourselves. And as Matthias said, the recording will be uploaded on our website in maybe 1 or 2 days, so that you can also share it with other people who might be interested in following this conversation. And I mean, actually, we are like out of time, but if there's like very pressing questions now, maybe you can just type them into the chat or address the person directly via email, or send the question to us, and then we can direct the question to the person you would like to ask the question to. And we will continue to engage with these kinds of topics throughout the next weeks and months. So we invite you to stay in touch with us. We have an Instagram account, a Twitter account, a Facebook account. You can like all of them and follow us there to see what is happening. And on our website, we also have a mailing list that if you type in this address, you can reach our website, where you can sign up for our mailing list and subscribe to our newsletter. Right then, I think we are done. Only 5 minutes passed. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.
Maybe
next time.
Maybe 2 more things, Lillian, before we close. Sorry to interrupt, but there were 2 comments in the chat. One by Catherine, who asked, can WEA, World Evangelical Alliance, recommend organizations to support who are actively engaging in countries where the pandemic is increasing inequality and suffering? And I just wanted to point you to the fact that WEA has started a specific task force to wrestle and to deal with the current COVID-19 crisis. And there are wonderful resources online. Maybe David Bowen, if you're still in the call, you could share the link to that task force in the chat. Otherwise, we will do so on the website where you then find the recording of this webinar. And another thing I just wanted to mention, there are multiple ways you can stay engaged with us as a World Evangelical Alliance Sustainability Center. You find the link to our mailing list here, but there's also the Pollinator, as it is called, a mailing list by the Lausanne WEA Creation Care Network, and Ed Brown has posted, thankfully, the link news.lwccn.com into the chat, and that is also a great way to stay in touch with everything that is happening, at least within the evangelical community, on creation care. So just to add that, sorry Lillian to interrupt, but now I think we're at the point where we can say thank you to all of you, and let's take that time for reflection also, maybe that as a final word. Let's not just go back to business as usual also in our working days, but let us maybe also take with us the notions of Jubilee and the idea of a Sabbath. Maybe we can give ourselves a Sabbath right in the middle of this crisis, because coming back to the idea at the beginning of the webinar, there is a lot to wrestle with at the moment. Contrasting realities are hitting us, and we need to take some time for reflection, for deep thinking, and also for prayer. And that is to close this meeting, and I thank you very much. Until next time, bye-bye.